Dabakis, D-A-B-A-K-I-S, and I represent the 2nd District of Salt Lake.
Senator Steve Urquhart from St. George, that's U-R-Q-U-H-A-R-T.
How do you spell that again?
S-T-E-V-E.
Thank you all for coming today. This is a terrific moment for Utah history on a lot of levels. I am appreciative of the LDS Church, who today came out strongly, without reservation, and completely for non-discrimination for LGBT people in housing and employment, not just in Utah, but all over the world. And I think the ramifications of this are gargantuan. I think the church realized this was a historic moment. They interrupted Oprah this morning to carry the press conference live, and to have 3 members of the Quorum of the 12 there speaks to the importance of this issue. I have been very privileged to be able to, since 2009, carry on a regular and complete dialogue with the LDS Church on LGBT issues. We started as strangers with a group of 4 or 5 LGBT community representatives, and now, after many meetings and many years, I can say that we are friends. We still have differences, but we have chosen to approach the bridge of our understanding, and where we agree and understand that there are things that we just disagree on, but remain civil, remain respectful, and remain confident that people that are earnestly looking for the right thing will be able to find that. So it is with great honor that I can say that it's a wonderful thing that the LDS Church today did, and I think that it's time we roll up our sleeves and we get down to the nitty-gritty of passing in Utah a statewide non-discrimination for LGBT people in housing and employment. And one other thing before I turn it over to Senator Urquhart. It's easy for the fat, gay Salt Lake City senator who represents the urban part of the city to stand up and talk about LGBT rights. It's not so easy for my colleague and friend, Senator Urquhart, who represents more out of the Wasatch Front District, and who has been bold and strong and forthright and honest and decent as he has defined fairness. And I'm tremendously appreciative to him for his leadership, for his support in this. And so we'll turn it over to Senator Urquhart.
Thank you. Senator Dabakis is not my gay friend, he's not my gay colleague, he's my friend and my colleague. And today the state of Utah has taken a major step to recognizing that. Utah is not always the first in great things, but very often we are the best on important things. We move methodically, but when we move, those moves tend to stick because we have brought on individuals and stakeholders along the way. And so today, you know, all of you are familiar with Utah. A major stakeholder jumped into this debate and this dialogue. What I heard, I think what you heard, was an unequivocal endorsement of non-discrimination in employment and housing for LGBT individuals. Now, we also heard a full-throated pitch for protection of religious liberties, and that also is something that I wholly support. It's embedded in the First Amendment. And so these are 2 things that they are very compatible. There's nothing contradictory to the two things. So I feel very confident that with the LDS Church at the table, we will move forward, and I'm extremely confident that now we will pass the legislation. You know, let me address the role of the LDS Church in this in the past few years. As you're aware, in 2009, the church came out in support of ordinances in Salt Lake City, Salt Lake County. And since then, it has been silent on this important issue. And I think the church, since 2009, has been in the exact place it announced today. This didn't surprise me in any way. But in the silence since 2009, a lot of folks have been stepping in and speaking for the Mormon Church, arguing that it was opposed to this legislation. As you heard today, it is not. And so this is a huge day for the state of Utah. It's a huge day for LGBT individuals and the LGBT community. And it's a huge day for the Mormon Church. I'm very proud and pleased to have the LDS Church at the table, fully engaged in this issue. You know, James Madison and the founders, they were brilliant in how they set up our government. We don't explode out on the streets with our complex issues. Instead, we implode to the middle, implode to our legislative bodies. That's where we place our toughest, most vexing, possibly most passionate issues, most divisive issues, and we typically come up with a solution. But that can only happen when we have the stakeholders at the table. And so at this point, I think the stakeholders are here, and now that we have good dialogue and everyone represented, we'll do what we do up here. We'll come up with a solution that works. And in this case, that means that it will protect LGBT individuals in their employment and in their housing, and it also will protect the important religious liberties that people hold. Thank you.
Any questions? Because Senator Urquhart and I, well, we agree on this, disagree with most everything else, so we got a lot to debate about at lunch. Is there any questions?
The press conference was kind of twofold in regards to not only they talk about the support there, but they also talked about the right of an individual as far as religious freedom. If you're a religious individual, you're against marriage or gay marriage, and you're marrying someone, you shouldn't be forced to marry them. Your reaction to, and there's also a bill being proposed right now on this very issue where a person shouldn't have to marry someone just because they have to, they're in a government position or something.
Sure, let's break that down. Most of the folks in this state who perform marriages, it's a discretionary choice on the part of that person. You know, I performed a marriage at Red Butte. It was a marvelous ceremony, despite my involvement. And I had the choice to say yes or no to that. And that's true of Mormon bishops, of just about everyone who performs marriages. And I think it is important that we, if needed, that we enshrine that in law to say that people have the choice to decide who they want to perform this ceremony and who they don't. But there is a small subset of that class, folks who have the obligation to perform such ceremonies. For example, county clerks. When someone walks in and they say, I want to be married, I meet the qualifications for marriage in this state, then it's that person's being paid taxpayer money to perform that ceremony. You know, that's what public officials do. We don't get to determine who we're going to provide gas service to, who we're going to provide electricity to, whose streets we're going to sweep, whose trash we're going to pick up, nor do we get to decide who we're going to marry. If it's a public servant's obligation to perform marriages, then that person needs to perform marriages for everyone who shows up meeting the qualifications of marriage.
Senator Urquhart, how does this reignite your efforts in the Senate to bring this non-discrimination bill to the floor, and who are your allies in the House going to be as you bring this effort now on this announcement from the church?
Thank you. First, did you want to address Daniel's?
So I'll just say briefly, we're talking about apples and oranges here. The church said, we're for we are for. It was unequivocal. They said, we're for non-discrimination against LGBT people. We're for non-discrimination. We are against discrimination against LGBT people in housing and employment. That's done. Now, the religious liberty issue, and is it a right of conscience, or this complicated thing, that is not, these are not tied together. So I see Senator Urquhart's bill as going its way, and whatever happens on the other issue. But if we do begin to extend to people, not religions, but people, the right to say, you know, my individual religion prohibits me from doing this public service, where does that end? What happens to the emergency technician who arrives on a heart attack victim and says, oh, you know what, I don't actually like to work on people of that color or race, or I don't want to work on somebody this. My personal religious philosophy is I don't want to deal with that kind of person. If we extend that individual right of conscience to every public employee that can go through a marriage line and say, you will marry, you I won't. You will marry, you I won't. That is going somewhere that I suspect the state does not want to go. Now on religious liberty, the First Amendment says religions have a paramount right to discriminate. You cannot compel a religion or an officer of a religion to marry somebody they don't want to marry, and that's the way it ought to be. But a public servant, that's an entirely different issue.
So the question, I believe, was what does this, how does this affect the likelihood of this legislation passing, and who are my allies in the House?
Correct, thank you, sir.
Okay. You know, I will let individual legislators speak for themselves, so I'm not going to answer who my allies in the House are, but I have several, and they will step up, and this makes it easier for them to step up. And so, same thing in the Senate. You know, so that is the answer to how it will impact the likelihood of passing this. Is it makes it easier for folks to support this, where there was, again, I don't think the ambiguity existed, but where folks were arguing that there was an ambiguity of where the LDS Church was on this issue, and people were arguing that the LDS Church was against the legislation. That factored significantly in the decision of some of our legislative colleagues. There are a lot of Mormons in the state. And, you know, just like if you were in Texas and had an issue that Baptists were really worked up about, you factor that in. If you're in Massachusetts, an issue that Catholics were energized on, you factor that in. And so, you know, that's a reality in this state, and I think it's a good reality. We have an awful lot of LDS folks, and they're important constituents, and I think that members of the Mormon Church heard very clearly today where their leaders are, where their church is on issues of discrimination based on sexual orientation and gender identity. And what the church said is that they're very against that discrimination. They want to actively work to end it. That is phenomenal.
Question. In the past, some of the opponents of the non-discrimination bill have said this is a slippery slope that will lead to other things. And in some cases, that's moot now because the U.S. Supreme Court has kind of based a non-ruling that says it is the law of the land. Do you think that those arguments will still be there? That this is a slippery slope? That by having a non-discrimination bill, will that lead to other kinds of things that they might oppose?
You know, anytime a politician doesn't want to take a step in a direction, we're very creative at coming up with reasons why we shouldn't take a step in that direction. And you know, that's always an easy one. Is every step we take is a step toward the next step, right? And so, you know, I have heard some people trying to resuscitate slippery slope arguments on this, but we've already slid down that slope. I mean, the slippery slope here was was gay marriage. And I think that Jim and his partner Stephen are proof that we can't go any further on that one, I don't think, so we're there. So, no, this helps clarify, you know, I think the Shelby decision, the Kitchen case last year helped clarify that the issue of non-discrimination, it is about discrimination. It is not about anything else. And I think that the LDS Church realizes that, and just the statements today, they were very well done. That this is an issue that it stands on its own, and so we can address it just like we address all the other issues we run legislation on. The question is, do we or do we not want folks to be discriminated in their places of employment, in their homes, based on their sexual orientation and gender identity? Do we think that's okay, or do we think that's something that should end? The issue is framed. Now let's just answer that, yes or no.
So, just imagine Snowbird after 2 feet of fresh powder, the crack of dawn. That's the slippery slope. And if this is a slippery slope against discrimination, I say bring on the slippery slope. We in Utah, our core, our fiber is non-discrimination. It's not who we are. It is not our heritage. It's not where we go. So if this is a slippery slope to non-discrimination in all parts of our state, I say slip away.
What does it say about the influence of the LDS Church on the legislature, that for 5 years this couldn't get out of the committee, or couldn't get to the floor, and now they've spoken and we both think this will pass? Is that a proper amount of influence? Steve, you mentioned they're an important stakeholder, but...
Well, Steve and I have not just been talking to the LDS Church. I mean, you can't imagine a Kiwanis Club or a gin club or a drinking group or a quilting association that we haven't hit. I mean, this is a matter like all legislation. You have to sit together and you try to bring as many allies as you can. We didn't have to spend as much time with Equality Utah as we have with other groups, but nonetheless, it's a process, and it's just part of the sausage of legislation. So, you know, we're happy to have them aboard. We're also happy to have a lot of other community and civic groups, and we'll let the battle begin. We're going to roll up our sleeves, and we're going to get into that legislation, and we're going to come up with things that will end discrimination in the state of Utah. What a marvelous thing that is. Who could be against it?
Religion informs the lives of many, many Americans. You know, someone probably has the data. Is it a majority of Americans? We're a pretty religious nation, pretty religious people. And I think that lots of places you go in America, you're going to have a lot of religious influence, Robert. And so, again, I have no problem that Baptists carry a lot of SWAT in Texas, where I live. I have no problem that Catholics carry a lot of SWAT in Massachusetts, where I live. That's people's religion informs their worldview. And so now I'm in Utah, where the LDS Church carries a lot of SWAT. I don't see that as a sinister thing. I don't even see that as a terribly big deal. I mean, that'd be weird if it weren't that way. The LDS Church, it commands a lot of discipline of its members, and it's something that it isn't a social club. It's something that the adherents take very seriously, and it does inform their beliefs, and that, of course, necessarily includes political beliefs. So, you know, I'd like to have a broader discussion on that issue alone, Robert, the role of religion in American politics, but I think it's active everywhere, and I think it's a good thing. I think most religions are out to do good things. They just kind of interpret that a little differently in some areas, and you know, I really applaud that the religion in this state with the most adherents, it clearly came out taking what I think is a huge step forward, declaring that all of God's children should be treated equally. This is just one of the best days I've had up here in my 15 years.
Senator Dabakis, as clear as the church was on non-discrimination, they were equally clear on their wanting for protections of religious freedom, and not just for religions, but for individuals of those tenets. You talked about this a little before, but how far are you willing to go on giving religious freedom? Is it just public servants, or where is that line in your mind?
You know, we're going to sit down, Senator Urquhart and I, very soon, and we're going to be sitting and figuring that out. I believe today's a day of celebration. I believe it's a day that we ought to talk about the commonalities, and we'll draw the line, and I feel confident and comfortable that we're going to come up with a great solution, because it is really critical for the future of the state of Utah that as we're perceived nationally, as we bring in economic development and employers here, and as we say, this is the place to bring your software company and your 1,000 jobs paying $50,000 or $100,000, we need to send the message out to those people that are making decisions in economic development. We need to send that message to tourists that are thinking about coming to Utah, that you may have misperceptions about our state. And Utah is on the front end of not tolerating non-discrimination. These issues go much broader than pieces of paper and a law. They go toward the hearts of where Utahns stand, and that we are a community that celebrates diversity, that we're not threatened by it, that we're a state that is welcoming to everybody. When we send that message through our legislation and through the way we go, we all benefit from that. So as to where the line will be here or there, we'll work on that, and there'll be a lot of hours, and Steve is a lawyer. He's going to be better at drawing lines than I am. But on a big 50,000-foot level, wouldn't it be good if we sent a message across the United States of America? Utah doesn't accept discrimination. That's really the important issue that comes out of this. Thank you.
Thanks.